Well, folks, we all thought the Tory Lanez vs. Megan Thee Stallion shooting case was over and done with, but it has been revived with a vengeance by Tory's legal team because they claim to have bombshell new evidence that would show that Tory in fact was not the one who shot Meg that night, and instead it was her best friend Kelsey that shot her that night. And of course this news is breaking as Tory is currently recovering from being stabbed 14 times in prison, where he's currently serving out the 10-year sentence he was given for being convicted of shooting Meg back in 2022. And naturally, with these kinds of updates, we've had everyone offering their 2 cents on the case, with folks ranging from Drake even to a sitting congresswoman that are calling on the governor of California to pardon Tory and release him from prison. But as expected, most of the people talking about this case online really don't know exactly what they're talking about, which is why I'm here to break this entire case down, starting back with the trial and how he got convicted in the first place, continuing all the way through the new updates we're getting today, and concluding with my belief on whether or not Tory should have actually been found guilty in the first place and whether or not he should be pardoned today. And I promise you, if you watch this video all the way through to the end, you will know far more about this case than nearly everyone online you see talking about it. So what's up everybody, my name's Scotty O, aka the Gen Z attorney, and I currently work as an assistant district attorney in North Carolina. So I'm a prosecutor, I do criminal law all day every day, I'm in courtrooms all day every day, and I use my insight and experience from working in the criminal law and prosecuting criminals to make videos about real life cases to discuss what folks are getting right and what folks are really getting wrong. And trust me, there is a ton that people are getting wrong about the Tory Lanez case. And so if you like this kind of content, be sure to let me know by dropping a like down below and subscribing to come back for more big brain legal breakdowns. But without further ado, let's jump right in. So to fully understand this story, we have to take ourselves back to July of 2020 to Kylie Jenner's house of all places. Now we all remember the times, it was the COVID times, it was the BLM times, and apparently it was the party times at Kylie Jenner's house because that is where Megan Thee Stallion, Tory Lanez, and Kelsey Harris were partying together. So they partied together at the house and then left together from the house with Jauquan Smith as their bodyguard slash driver driving the car away from the house. And it was at this point, as they were driving away, that apparently an argument broke out inside the car. Now everything up to this point was largely undisputed at trial, but this is where the stories started to diverge from each other. According to Meg's testimony, they learned in that car that Tory Lanez had been sleeping with both Meg and Kelsey, thus revealing a love triangle involving 2 best friends. And thus an argument broke out, leading Meg to get out of the car and attempt to walk away. But it was at that point, as Meg was walking away, she turns around, sees Tory leaning out of the car with a gun, and hears him say, "Dance bitch dance," and shoots at her feet. Now Tory's version starts a little similar, but then takes a drastic turn, because he doesn't deny that it was revealed that there was a love triangle, that he had been sleeping with these 2 best friends. However, according to Tory, that is when Meg and Kelsey started arguing with each other, and that argument turned physical with them fighting each other outside of the car. It was then his testimony that he went to go break up the fight, and during that breakup, a gun somehow got involved, and shots ended up going off, although it wasn't clear who would do the shooting. It would have to heavily imply it was Kelsey doing the shooting, but it deserves to be noted that Tory never actually stated that he saw Kelsey do the shooting. So that really does summarize the key facts in that night in July 2020, with really the main difference just being who did the shooting. It wasn't disputed that there was shooting, and it wasn't disputed that the shooting did hit Meg in the feet, but it was heavily contested who actually fired the shots. So fast forward to December 2022, where Tory stood accused of assaulting Meg specifically with the use of a firearm, which, as we all know, that trial resulted in the conviction of Tory Lanez. That conviction led to a 10-year sentence, which takes us to the present day now, where he was stabbed 14 times while serving out that sentence. Now, if I had to guess, you watching this video, you probably fall in one camp or the other, either the pro-Meg camp or the pro-Tory camp, and I hate to break to both sides, but I feel like at different parts of this video, you both are not going to like me. But as a prosecutor, I feel my duty in this video is to call balls and strikes as I see them, to be as fair as I possibly can, and that's what I'm going to do. And yeah, if I'm being honest, I don't think I would have voted guilty if I was on the jury in this case. Now, that's not to say I don't think he did it, I'm just saying I don't think I would have been convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that he did do it, which is the standard in a criminal court. However, I do want to give some credence to the jury in the case and go through some of the reasons why they probably did find a verdict of guilty, because, you know, it was a unanimous verdict. It has to be 12 unanimous jurors who all say we are all convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that he's guilty of this crime. And because they did reach that verdict, I think it deserves some discussion as to why they might have reached that verdict. And first and foremost, I think the biggest reason likely has to do with the fact that Meg is the superstar that she is, and it was really undisputed that someone shot a gun, the bullets hit the ground, fragmented, and hit her in the feet. During the state's case in chief, the prosecution called a surgeon to testify, specifically the surgeon who performed foot surgery on Megan Thee Stallion to remove fragments of bullet from her feet, and the doctor even testified he wasn't actually even able to get all the fragments out of her feet. And so yeah, since July 2020, as we've seen Meg become an even bigger superstar to this day, we have to keep in mind she still has fragments of bullets in her feet from July 2020. And so with that in mind, and with Meg testifying in the case, the jury was able to put a clear face to the victim. And it wasn't just any victim, and it wasn't just any face. This was Megan Thee Stallion's face, with clear, conclusive, indisputable evidence that she was in fact the victim of somebody shooting her in the feet. And as someone who is clearly victimized, that creates a real drive in a jury to deliver justice for that victim. And when you're in that situation and you've got your defendant here standing as the one accused of this crime, he's really the only one you can point your finger to in that situation. So that's the first main reason I can see why the jury wanted to convict Tory Lanez in this case. Second big reason is the fact that Tory apologized several times in the immediate aftermath of the shooting. Now granted, he never specifically apologizes for the shooting itself, never says, "I'm sorry I shot you." Instead, he's apologizing just for what happened. But as a jury, you're left to infer, what is he talking about what happened? Because yeah, there's jail logs of him being in the jail and calling Kelsey to call her and apologize for what happened. And then he also texted Meg directly and apologized for what happened and said he was just too drunk. And so although Tory gave a different explanation for why he was apologizing, which I'm going to get into in a little bit, as a jury, you're still left with the prospect of the defendant apologizing for his conduct, which when you combine that with a very sympathetic victim, it creates a strong drive, once again, to deliver justice for that victim and point the finger directly at the only person who's apologizing for what happened. In this case, a strong inference can be made that he's apologizing for the shooting. And finally, the third main reason I could see why the jury would convict was the lack of testimony from one key witness in this case. The defense had listed Jauquan Smith as one of the witnesses they planned to call to testify, and that's notable because Jauquan Smith was the driver in the car that night. Right, there were 4 people in that car: Tory Lanez, Kelsey, Meg, and Jauquan Smith. In a case where Meg is the victim, Tory is the defendant, Kelsey is potentially the one who actually did the shooting, all 3 of them are directly involved in the outcome of the case. The only independent witness is Jauquan Smith, and so his testimony is arguably going to be the most reliable of anyone in the car that night. And presumably, that's why the defense had him on the witness list, and he was even in the courthouse prepared to testify, but the defense just never called him. Now, the explanation offered for not calling him was that the trial was getting awfully close to Christmas, and they wanted to be done before Christmas. But I'm sorry, if you're a juror, your job is to weigh the evidence that's presented to you, and extraneous factors like scheduling or trying to be done by Christmas is still going to leave you feeling like you want more, feeling like you didn't get the full story. And especially if he's got testimony that would be exonerating of Tory, if that testimony never comes in, the jury can't use it. Now granted, we don't know exactly what he was going to say, so we can't say for certain what he would have testified to. All I know is that he would have been the best witness to call, the most unbiased witness, and also the one with the clearest vantage point, because Meg said she got out of the car and walked forward in the front of the car where the headlights were pointing. If he's sitting in the driver's seat, he would have seen exactly where she was and exactly who was in the passenger seat or who was leaning out of the car shooting the gun at her, according to Meg at least. Now, if you take Tory's side of things, where Kelsey and Meg got out of the car and were fighting, you could have seen exactly if that was true, and if Tory went to go break it up, how a gun got involved. So many questions could have been answered if he testified, but he didn't. And I can see how the jury would have held that against Tory's defense and found him guilty. So yeah, I can see how the jury would have used those reasons to have found him guilty of this crime. But as I said earlier, I probably would have voted not guilty. And if I'm being honest, there's a couple huge holes in this case that I think just create more than enough reasonable doubt to have found him not guilty here. And the first big hole in this case I can see has to do with the forensic evidence, specifically the DNA profiles on the gun, as well as the gunshot residue that was at the scene. So upon testing the gun to see whose DNA could be found on it, the prosecution found 4 different DNA profiles on the magazine of the gun, but none of those profiles belonged to Tory Lanez. As for a DNA swab on the entire gun, the best they could come up with was an inconclusive test, meaning, right, it was inconclusive, not yes, but also not no, inconclusive as to whether or not Tory handled the gun ever. So right, there's no DNA evidence linking Tory to the gun, which is bad enough. But then when you combine that with the fact that Kelsey's DNA was never taken and never tested to see if it was on the gun, that creates a double whammy of bad forensic investigation and shows the prosecution could have been biased in rushing to judgment and trying to convict Tory because they want him to be guilty, despite what any potential evidence might say. This is especially appalling because gunshot residue was found on the hands of both Tory and Kelsey. Now, for those who don't know, gunshot residue is referring referring to the bits of residue that are left on everything close to a gun when it is fired. Because right, when a bullet is fired, it creates an explosion of gunpowder, and that explosion just sends just little particles in all directions that can then get in people's hands, people's clothes. All that means is that when there's gunshot residue on something, that means a gun was fired in a very close proximity to that thing. And in this case, gunshot residue was found on both Tory's hand and Kelsey's hand. So at the very least, we can pretty solidly conclude that one of those two was the one who shot the gun. Yet only one of their DNA was taken to be tested to see if it matched any DNA that was found on the gun. So yeah, all that tells me about the forensic investigation is that it was shoddy, rushed, and really not that thorough. And if Meg's story was true and Tory was leaning out of the car shooting the gun, of course he'd have gunshot residue on his hand, but that does not explain at all how gunshot residue was found on Kelsey's hand. Versus if you take Tory's explanation of events, which is that they were fighting and he went to break it up and somehow a gun got involved and it went off as he was breaking up the fight, that would easily explain how gunshot residue ended up on two different people's hands. And while yes, because it was on two people's hands, we can conclude that one of them was the shooter, I'm sorry, the standard of proof in the criminal justice system is not a coin flip 50-50 one or the other. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. You have to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that this person committed the crime they're accused of. So yeah, the forensic evidence left a lot to be desired in this case. That's not even to mention the inconsistent stories that were being provided by Megan's side of the case. Because when you take the key witnesses on the prosecution side, mainly being Meg and Kelsey, throughout the entire process, they told several different versions of what happened that night. Specifically, when Kelsey did a sit-down recorded interview with police, her story basically was a one-to-one match with what Meg was saying about how there was an argument, Meg got out, walked away, Tory leaned out, shot at her feet, and then offered them $1 million bribe to stay silent. That was all part of her recorded interview, and that's why the prosecution called Kelsey, because they expected her to testify to what she had already told them in her police interview. However, when she took the stand and testified under oath and under the penalty of perjury, she did not confirm Meg's story, and instead she actually said she had lied in that police interview to protect herself, and did not remember Tory holding a gun, did not remember Tory shooting a gun, and did not remember anything about $1 million bribe. As for other questions she was asked, she pled the fifth repeatedly, meaning she invoked her right against self-incrimination, which in layman's terms means if she gave an answer to the question she was asked, she was potentially incriminating herself with criminal culpability. She would have been testifying as to a crime she committed. That's what the Fifth Amendment is for, as a protection to not compel people to testify about their own crimes. And while yes, we're supposed to treat it as not weighing one way or the other, we can all kind of develop an intuitive sense that when someone pleads the fifth, it means they probably did whatever they're talking about. So right, Kelsey's testimony on the witness stand was kind of a nightmare for the prosecution. Which then brings us to Meg's testimony. And yes, while I've already said that the evidence is indisputable that bullets were fired, they hit the ground near Meg's feet, and bullet fragments hit her in the feet, her story about the rest of what happened also changed over time. She was asked by Gayle King in an interview whether or not she had been having sexual relations with Tory Lanez. And she said in the interview, "No, I was not."
Did you have an intimate relationship with him?
Like sexual?
Yeah. Megan, did you have a sexual relationship with Tory Lanez? Yes, that's my question.
I didn't have a sexual relationship with Tory.
So that was a fucking lie.
But then at some point later on social media, she then admitted to lying to Gayle King and admitting she was having sexual relations with Tory.
Yes, bitch, I lied to Gayle King, bitch. First of all, I didn't know that bitch was even gonna ask me about that shit. Bitch was always gonna talk about this shooting. Why'd you ask me about fucking Tory? That's not what this is about. Even if I was, I fucked this nigga like once, maybe twice on a drunk night. Bitch, you kept catching me out of my fucking mind.
And that may seem like a silly thing, but we're talking about credibility here. And the only eyewitness that says they saw Tory Lanez pull the trigger of the gun is Meg. And so her credibility is squarely in the center of this entire case. Which then brings up the other huge thing that both her and Kelsey were conveniently forgetting, and it's the fact that the two of them were fighting. If you remember, Meg's entire story was that when the love triangle was revealed, both of them got in an argument with Tory, then she got out of the car and walked away. At no point did she ever mention her and Kelsey fighting. Now I know what some of you might be saying, how are you stating as a fact that they were fighting when Tory was the only one saying that they were fighting? Well, that's because the evidence from that night does back up the fact that they were fighting. Specifically, when police responded to the scene, they found that Kelsey had scratches on her, had clumps of hair missing, had a strap on her bathing suit broken, and had a nail broken. And I don't know if y'all have seen too many videos of women fighting, but I can say, both from Twitter and from my job, it involves a lot of hair pulling and a lot of scratching. So not only did Kelsey have injuries consistent with fighting a woman, there was also testimony of the only independent witness that actually did testify. And that was from a neighbor who testified that he was awoken by commotion going on outside of his house, at which point he goes outside and sees two women fighting, and a flash happen while the two women are fighting. She then sees a third person, who is a shorter man, go over to help try and break up the fight, at which point several more flashes happen. So yeah, I feel confident stating it as a fact that Meg and Kelsey were in fact fighting, just based on, once again, the injuries and based on the independent witness corroborating it, as well as Tory's theory of the case. But yet at no point, to my knowledge, at the very least at no point during the trial, did Meg ever confirm that is in fact what happened, that she ever was physically fighting Kelsey. And once again, with her credibility being squarely in the center of this trial, that's a big deal. So yes, my vote of not guilty was largely influenced by the forensic evidence and the inconsistent testimony from Meg's side of the case. But I gotta say, the third and maybe even the biggest reason for why I would have voted not guilty has to do with Meg's injuries specifically. Because while it's undeniable that there were bullet fragments that hit her in the feet, I want to focus on where they hit her. Because the testimony at trial was that they hit her in the back of her heel and Achilles area, aka the back of her feet. But if you remember her testimony, she stated she got out of the car, walked away, turned around, and was facing Tory straight on, which is how she saw him shooting the gun at her feet. But I'm sorry, that's just not how bullet fragmentation works. There's no way you could be facing somebody and they shoot a bullet that hits behind you and the bullet then fragments and ricochets back at your heels. Unless you were standing in front of a wall or something where the bullets would hit the ground, fragment, hit the wall, and then bounce back and hit your heel. Bullets just have way too much velocity to hit and fragment and go any direction but continuing to go forward. Which means really the only possible conclusion, at least that I can draw from where the injuries happened on Meg's feet, means she had to have been facing away when the shots were fired. And while that can also go towards Meg's credibility as to whether or not she was actually facing him, which the evidence of her injuries seemed to suggest she was not facing him, it also just goes to show, how can you definitively say at all who shot the bullets if you were facing away? And so it was for those reasons that, even though at the time I felt like, yeah, maybe Tory did it, and I mean, probably more likely than not that he did it and not Kelsey, I was by no means convinced beyond a reasonable doubt, and therefore I would have voted not guilty in the case. Now I do want to give credit to the jury as far as they were the ones that were in the courtroom for the whole thing. They saw all the evidence, at least all the admissible evidence. They are the least biased parties to hear the evidence. So of course I want to give them some credit on that front, but from my review of the evidence as it was reported, I just don't see how it could sustain this conviction. But out of respect for the jury, I was going to let their verdict stand without much hubbub. And so then that conviction was what landed Tory 10 years in prison, which takes us to the current day. And this case has launched back into the headlines because, as I mentioned earlier, Tory was stabbed 14 times in prison by an inmate who apparently is serving time for murder and has a habit of assaulting other inmates. Because as for the stabbing itself, it caused both of Tory's lungs to collapse and caused him to be put in critical condition. But thankfully, he managed to pull through, and apparently now he's in good spirits. But this situation has led the spotlight to be put right back on this case and leading new evidence to come out. Because now Tory Lanez' team is saying that they have testimony from Kelsey's former bodyguard where he's claiming to have overheard Kelsey talking with her husband, where she stated that she shot Meg. Now, notable here that at this press conference, this bodyguard was not there to tell the people directly what he said. It was Tory's team that was relaying what he said. So if they want this to go anywhere in court, they would need him to actually be willing to testify to that. Because as we saw with Kelsey's testimony, she told one story during her out-of-court police interview and then told a totally new story in court under oath. But yeah, regardless, this is one of those things where it's, big if true, and gives a lot of weight towards Tory's side of things and the people that are calling for his pardon, which at this point, I would probably include myself in that camp, that he probably deserves a pardon. This is not to minimize the true victimization of Megan Thee Stallion. And in fact, my perspective on what happened that night has changed since the trial. Back during the trial, I had a perspective of, I really don't know what happened. Did Tory do it? And my feeling ranged on that from maybe to probably, but I was not satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt. However, now my feeling of what probably happened was that the girls were fighting and Tory either went to go break it up and Kelsey already had the gun and it went off, or Tory went to go break it up with the gun and shot it as like a, hey, break it up type thing. I don't know, but I still would really love to hear what Jauquan Smith has to say as the driver in the car who can testify to exactly what happened. But regardless, that is things as they stand now. And actually, as I'm recording this video, I saw Megan's team post their own response to the press conference that Tory Lanez' team gave, and I have some thoughts. But this video's gone on long enough. If you want me to make another video going through the response that Meg's team has put out, then yeah, I would love to. I'd be more than happy to. Probably, honestly, I'm gonna make that video anyway. But yeah, if that's something you want to see, then drop a like on this video. That'll let me know to keep making content on this case. And leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think about this case. Are you Team Tory, Team Meg, or neither? And last but not least, if you like this kind of content, then be sure to subscribe to come back for more. As I said earlier, I'm really just trying to call balls and strikes to be fair to all sides of a case and just call it like I see it. And so if that's the kind of voice you want to hear talking about big, high-profile legal cases, then I think this is the place for you. But that is all for this video, so I look forward to seeing everybody on the next one.